Some land you want to buy, some land you don't. And in this video, what I'm going to do is show you how to know the difference between the two. And I'm going to do that by showing you two separate properties that are located just a couple miles away from each other in Richlands, North Carolina. One of these two properties, if I could get a good price on it, I would definitely buy it. But the other one, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And as we peel back the layers and I show you a little bit more information about these two properties, I think that you're going to understand why, and the reason may surprise you. Now let's take a look at each of the two properties at a glance. The first property is this 96.9 acre property on Barbie Road in Richlands, North Carolina. Asking price $550,000. This is a large tract rural home site with some cleared farmland in the front and a large area of timberland in the back of the property. Offers a lot of privacy. It's also kind of like a really nice serene rural setting that could make for a good home site. The second property is this 29.2 acre property on Remington Way in Richlands, North Carolina, asking price $400,000. This is a large wooded lot that is located behind a suburban subdivision that has a really nice natural pond that could be a good staging location for a future home site. What I'm going to do in this video is really compare and contrast these two properties with a very simple analysis on three main attributes of each of the two properties. Number one is going to be access. Number two is going to be potential for a single family home. Then the third attribute we're going to look at is environmental features. And after reviewing these three features across both of these two properties, we're going to figure out which of these two properties comes out on top and why. By the way, if you're going through the process of buying a piece of land, I want you to click the link in the description to get a free due diligence checklist that we developed after hundreds of successful land transactions, and I think it's going to really help you. So let's get started. First, we're going to look at the access of both of these two properties. And when we say access, whenever we're talking about land, there's really a definition that's important to focus on and make sure that you understand. Because access is really defined in two phases. Number one is what's called legal access. Legal access is basically, can you get to the property without illegally trespassing on somebody else's land? Physical access is the second element of access, and what physical access basically refers to is, can I get to the property in a car? Or do I have to hike through the woods? Like, what's the quality of my ability to actually get to the property physically without having to establish a new driveway? The practical importance of physical and legal access are really hard to overstate when it comes to land, because if a piece of property is landlocked, either because you can't get to it legally or physically you can't get to it, then the market value of that property really suffers as a result. So what we're going to do is take a look at the access on both of these properties and compare and contrast it. So on Barbie Road, this is the 97 acres. We'll call this tract one. The way that the access works is it comes in on a dirt road from the main asphalt county maintained public road. The dirt road actually comes through a deeded easement, and an easement is basically a right of way, an area that is to the benefit of the property owner, that they're able to basically cross through it to get to their land. Now, this is a private easement, and the significance of a private easement is that the land that you cross through from the county road before you get into the interior of this property is actually someone else's private property. So a private easement basically is like that neighbor has agreed to allow the driveway through their property. Now, the dirt road is the aspect of physical access that actually allows you to drive up into the property, and the dirt road follows the interior of the deeded easement. And so even though the dirt road and the easement are technically separate concepts, they both align on a map of the property, and both the dirt road and the easement coincide, which is good because that means you have both physical and legal access here. Now, the dirt road is a lower quality of access, and I want to tell you what I mean by that. Like, basically the actual road that you take from the county road into your property, it's a dirt road, which means that it's going to be a lower quality surface, which is more susceptible to erosion and wear and tear, which means that it's going to take a little bit more money to maintain it over time. It's also going to be less viable for a higher density subdivision on this land. And the reason why is that whenever you're going through like subdivision approval, if it's a minor subdivide or a major subdivide, practically speaking, the county or city that is approving the subdivide is going to want that property that's being split up into smaller building lots to have an extensive area of road frontage, typically on a county or city maintained road, which we don't have that here. Overall, though, this property works really well in terms of access, especially if you're just building a single family home site on this land and it's just a single home, and that's really all that you need, and you definitely have that here. So now let's take a look at Remington Way and the access on this property, and the Remington Way property, we'll refer to it as tract 2. Now, in the listing, it says access is available via easement off of Remington Way or via a public right-of-way off of Cottle Court. Now, Remington Way, when you look at a satellite map, is a sort of a dirt road that goes through a very private subdivision on the eastern and southeastern border of our property. And like you would have to kind of get your driveway through this really private subdivision to extend it into the interior of the property. And to do that, it's like less than ideal because it's a very private neighborhood back there. And so they may not even know that there's a right of way that goes through their subdivision. And so you have to ruffle some feathers to even use that stretch of road. And for that reason, it's probably not the best driveway. The better access is the 50-foot wide public right of way off of Cottle Court. And the reason that you know that is that they're promoting it in the listing because the listing agent knows that this is a higher quality driveway. And I want to tell you why the Cottle Court access is going to be a little bit better than the one off of Remington Way. Number one is the access is better on Cottle Court because it's wider. So essentially the right of way here is 50 feet wide. And so if ever you were going to build a small subdivision in this property, so if you wanted to build 10, 15, 20, or more than 20 homes, oftentimes to get approval for a major subdivision, you have a certain number of traffic counts that are estimated based on the number of homes that are going to be built. And based on the traffic counts, typically at a certain threshold, the city or county is going to want you to have a two-way driveway. So one driveway in, one driveway out. And so practically speaking, you need about 50 feet of width in order to get that kind of driveway permitted. And so you have that here, which is good. The other reason it's going to be a better access point is because it's a little bit closer to the subdivision to the north. And in theory, that subdivision is going to have the presence of utilities, not only sewer and water utilities, but also power. And so the idea is that since you're closer to the utilities, you don't have to extend them as far, which means that getting the utilities onto your land is going to be less expensive. The third reason is that this driveway is actually more level. You can actually see that a lot of grading and leveling has been done in this little strip, this driveway area. And so for that reason, there's more like site improvements to that stretch of driveway, and that should save you some cost on actually finishing the work if you choose to. Now, one thing I want to mention on the right-of-way here, and you see it in one of the listing photos, is that it's actually a public right-of-way. In the previous example on Tract 1 on Barbie Road, we saw a private right-of-way, and a public right-of-way basically just means that anybody in theory can use that right-of-way for their own purposes. Doesn't mean they can go onto your property without your permission, but when you have a public right-of-way, it's for the benefit of the public at large, as opposed to a private right-of-way where the landowners whose land the right-of-way extends across and through their property, they actually have an ability to say who comes and goes and for what reason. Now, the challenge with this easement, when you look at the right-of-way on Cottle Court, is that there's still going to be significant cost to actually build out that driveway. You know, the reason why is because it's a public right-of-way, and so therefore the road that you build on that public easement is typically going to have to be built to city or county road standards. What that means in this context, I would imagine just looking at the road in the subdivision, is that at the very least, you're going to have to build 15 feet wide of an asphalt road through this driveway, in addition to the drainage ditches on either side to manage the drainage and stormwater runoff. The way it works when you have a public right-of-way and you're building on it is generally that you actually have to pay the cost up front as the private home builder or the private developer. And then once the road is built up to the city or county standard, then at that point moving forward, they're going to pick up the maintenance on the back end. And so if there's any potholes, if there's any cracks, if the road has some wear and tear, in theory, the municipality's got your back and they're going to pay for that, but you got to build it to their standards first. And assuming that you have 15 foot wide of asphalt that you have to put down here, that's 200 feet long by 15 feet wide. So you're really looking at a 3,000 square foot driveway here. And ballpark, I'd say that's going to add about $3,000 to your construction cost just for the driveway. And of course, that's if everything goes according to plan. From the standpoint of the practicality of the access here, especially if you're just talking about building a single family residence on one of the properties, Tract 1 or Tract 2, I think that Tract 1 on Barbie Road has more practical, more efficient access. And the main reason why is because you can actually get in your car and drive to the interior of that property without actually having to pay to make any further improvements to the road, which is great. Now, the second aspect of these properties that we want to look at is the potential for both of these properties for a single family home. Now, let's look at Tract 1 on Barbie Road first. So when you see this property, it's really cleared in the front of the property. You have about 6 acres of cleared cropland, and that's going to be a really good area to potentially build a home. It's flat, it's cleared, it's mostly graded, and so you have a lot of the startup costs of grading and leveling and the initial site improvement already done for you, plus the driveway. So right here, you're in kind of a rural part of the county. And so you're going to be further away from the sewer and water utility services. And honestly, even if they existed on Barbie Road, the actual cost of extending the sewer and water to the interior of this property is going to be cost prohibitive. So for that reason, you're going to plan on building a well and septic for your wastewater and for your water service here on this property. And so with regard to septic, when you go to the land ID soil map, what you find is actually pretty good news. You have Norfolk loamy fine sand here, which is a very well-drained soil, which if that map is accurate means that you're not going to have a ton of problems building a septic for even a large private residence here on this property. Now, when we look at track 2, it's a little more complicated because in order to establish potential for a single family home site, you actually have to clear a large area of vegetation for the driveway as well as the home site itself. Now, we talked about the $30,000 or so in paving costs for the asphalt, but you're probably going to have a similar cost, maybe another $25,000 to $30,000 just on land clearing and grading to clear out enough of the vegetation into the inside of the property so that you can create an area where you can actually build a home. And the utilities here are tricky because even though you may have water and sewer on Cottle Court, the reality is you'd have to still extend those services at least 300 feet through that easement into the interior of the property where your future home would be located. Now, it seems like 300 feet, well, maybe that's not so big of a deal, but the actual cost of extending sewer and water lines like that, it's way more than you would think. By the time it's all said and done, I mean, costs may vary by your local market, but if you're hiring a contractor to do this, it's going to cost about $100 per linear foot, which means for 300 feet for both the sewer and the water lines, that could cost another $30,000 a piece just to get those services onto the property. Now, the reason that you would actually do that here, even though it's more expensive in theory than well and septic on a single property, is if you were building a really high density subdivision, because if you were doing that, you have some economies of scale where the cost for getting the utility lines extended could actually be distributed across a higher number of homes. And so for that reason, it might make sense. But if you're building a single home here, you're going to be on well and septic. And there's a couple reasons we'll touch on in just a little bit where this is probably not the best site for a high density subdivision for reasons that we'll discuss. So if you're on septic and well here, the cost of a septic is going to be about $10,000, give or take, and maybe about $12,000 for the well. So you're really going to save about $38,000 just by putting the septic and the well here as opposed to the sewer and water. But you got to be careful on soils here because before you make the assumption that you can install a septic, you want to look at the soil series and also get a soil scientist out to the property to verify suitability for septic. Now, the soil map here shows forested loamy fine sand, which should be a good soil for you, but it also shows subtype W. It has excess water. And so you may have a high water table here. And for that reason, you do want to be careful before you make assumptions about putting the septic in. But with any luck, a good soil scientist is going to be able to find a spot for you. So once again, in terms of potential for single family residential home, the property on Barbie Road, Tract 1, looks to be the more straightforward of the two options. Now let's take a look at the environmental features of these two properties. Let's go back to Tract 1 on Barbie Road. What you actually see when you look at the wetlands map here is that you do have extensive wetlands on the northern half of the property. In fact, about 50% of the area of the entire property is covered by wetlands. The reason that the wetlands are really important is that if you are building a home and if the area on your property that you have to build the home has wetlands on it, it makes it really difficult from a regulatory and approval standpoint, let alone the actual engineering of building a structure in the wetlands. The challenges that relate to engineering are pretty significant because when you build on ground that's wetlands or wet soil conditions, what happens is sometimes the building foundation can settle, which basically means that the building foundation can sink, over a period of time. And also the moisture from the surrounding soil can seep into the building foundation and start to erode the structural integrity of the home that you've built there. So when you build a home in the wetlands at all, forget about the actual regulations, which are really hard to overcome. But even if you did it and you didn't even get it permitted, there's just practical challenges, and the investment that you've made in that home is really at risk, and it's going to depreciate way faster, and it's not going to be the best place to build that home. Now, fortunately for the Barbie Road property, the wetlands that we have are all on the northern edge of the property, in the northern half of the property. So in the likely home location, which is on or near the cropland, the cleared cropland in the front of the property, you don't have wetlands there, and you don't have wetlands on your way into the property either. So for that reason, reason, you don't really have a whole lot of regulations to worry about. You're not going to have to deal with any of that permitting or any of those restrictions. Now, the other thing about the wetlands on the northern part of the property is actually a lot of them are on the far side of a utility easement, which it would kind of be hard practically to like build up there anyway. I mean, there would be a much longer and more expensive driveway. Also, you have like much better areas to build on the southern half of the property. But those woods create a nice privacy buffer for you to the north and around the edges of the property. What it also does is it contains considerable timber value. I wouldn't be surprised if the timber on that land is worth the better part of $90,000. Overall, though, Barbie Road, when it comes to environmental issues, even with the wetlands and everything, because they're out of your way, you're not going to have a lot of issues to have to overcome. And so that brings us to track 2 on Remington Way, where when you look at the wetlands map, it's a bit of a different story. And the wetlands on the eastern section of this property, when you actually look, it covers up a good bit of the eastern portion of the property. And what it also does is it covers up and blankets up the 2 entry points that you can actually get into the interior of the property, from Cottle Court to the north and Remington Way to the east. So there's really no way into the interior of this property without crossing through those wetlands, which just kills you. It just kills you because you already have so much in additional startup costs on the asphalt driveway, the uncertainty around the engineering expenses to bring the actual road through the wetlands, let alone the uncertainty on the utilities. When you look at the northern edge of the wetlands area towards the southern edge of the public easement, and you compare that to the photo of the public right-of-way from the listing, you can actually see the wetlands and the shrub wetlands under the blue arrow in the photo. Because you're probably wondering, like, wait, did they forget to mow that area? Like, why is the vegetation so thick there, and yet the rest of that grassy clearing is like so neatly mowed and manicured? Like, it's so perfect. Did they just like fall asleep on the job? Well, no, the reason that that vegetation looks that way is because it's really thick and the soil underneath it is wet, which means it's really hard to get in there with equipment. And so for that reason, they just let it stay overgrown. And so you can actually see the wetlands, not even on the property, but coming out of the property into that easement. And so you really have a bigger problem than you might think here. The reason you have a problem is that the permitting of building your driveway has to go through the wetlands. You're going to have like all these regulators at the state level and potentially at the federal level involved in every phase of your site plan. You're going to have to do environmental impact studies. You're going to have to do like stormwater runoff analysis, like wetlands ecology analysis. It's just going to be really tough, and it's going to add a lot of costs and expenses to your build. And so overall, in terms of the environmental constraints on these 2 properties, tract 1 on Barbie Road once again looks to be the better of the 2 properties. But before we get ahead of ourselves, in the process of finishing my research on Barbie Road, I actually noticed something that I didn't notice before about the neighboring property immediately to the west, which is when you look at that property, it's a very long barn with what appears to be a pond immediately next to it. But the thing is, that's not just any barn, that's a hog barn. And that's not just any pond, that's a hog lagoon. For those of you who don't know, in eastern North Carolina, hog farming is a big business. It's basically the hog farming capital of the world. And in that part of the state, in eastern North Carolina, you actually have more hogs than people. And in a concentrated animal feeding operation like this, like an industrial farm operation like this, pound for pound, hogs are going to produce 10 times the amount of solid waste per day when compared to humans. And a single hog barn like the one you have on that property can have between 1,000 and 2,000 hogs in one location. So the waste has to go somewhere. And what they do is they put the waste into a hog lagoon where the bacteria breaks down the manure, and the manure is recycled then later into fertilizer, into liquid fertilizer that then gets used through sprinkler systems to irrigate farmland in the immediate area. So yeah, obviously not ideal, highly controversial, and not the best place to build a home, because in theory, even with a curtain of trees to buffer you here to the west between you and the hog farm, on hot summer days, like, you're probably still going to detect the presence and you're probably going to get some odor through the tree line. When you actually look on Barbie Road, the signage out front on the county road, you see that it's a Smithfield farm. They also share your driveway. So not great, not ideal. I think we can probably agree. But before you write off Barbie Road, and I didn't intend this at all, this is just something that I found when I was finishing up the research for the video, you actually have a hog farm next to Remington Way as well. So tract 2 is no longer immune from hog farm activity either. You actually see in the aerial photos of the listing, right past the tree line to the south of our property is a big hog farm, and it's actually a much bigger one here than the one that's on Barbie Road. And it's right there, like the pond on the southern southern edge of the Remington Way property, it's like 300 feet from several large hog lagoons, and the only buffer that you actually have in between is like a 50-foot curtain of tree line. And so when you realize that this is actually another feature, another knock against the Remington Way property, you realize how bad of a property it really is. You've got bad access. The driveway is going to be super expensive, and you're going to have to pull the utilities with uncertain distance, uncertain cost from the subdivision. Cross your fingers you can get a septic system if you can't do that. You have extensive wetlands right through the driveway area of the property, which there's no telling what it's going to cost to build a road that meets all the compliance requirements to actually do that. Then you have a hog farm a couple hundred feet away from you. And the idea that the cover photo of this listing is the pond that both the owner and the listing agent know full well is a stone's throw away from several large industrial hog lagoons just shows you how bad this property really is and how desperate they are to find a single selling point that allows them to put their best foot forward and hopefully find a buyer. And the thing is, like, even if the hog farm wasn't there and it wasn't right across the tree line, the hard reality, guys, is the pond isn't even that great. Like, it's kind of a lame pond. Look at this. Look at these photos. Like, it's a mediocre pond at best. At best. It's like not that good. And so to get a gauge on like what this land on Remington Way might actually sell for, to estimate the actual market value here, I want to look at a nearby sold comp. This is a 26-acre piece of land on Fountaintown Road that sold at $130,000 earlier this year. That is less than 1/3 the current asking price of Remington Way. And knowing what you know now about Remington Way, is there any world where you would rather own the Remington Way property than this 26 acres on Fountaintown Road with direct road frontage on the county asphalt road out there? I don't think there's any planet that I would rather own Remington Way than this 26-acre property. Remington Way is the kind of property, guys, that honestly, if it sells at all, and it might not, it probably won't, but if it does, it'll sell in like 2 years in the future when no one's looking for like $75K cash. And yet Barbie Road, on the other hand, at the right price, honestly, I'd buy it. And I want to talk about the hog farm on Barbie Road and why it doesn't actually hurt this property nearly as much as on Remington Way. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one is the hog farm operation is smaller, which means that there's going to be less odor when you notice it. And probably a lot of the time, a lot of the year, you're not going to notice it at all. Like, it might not even be that big of a deal, to be honest with you. And in part, the reason why that's true is because you could probably put your home back far enough into the woods, like the pine forest that would buffer you, if depending on where you put your home, could actually insulate you from any evidence of like nearby farming activity. And to say nothing of the farm next door, you might not notice that either. So also this part of the county, this part of Richlands, it's actually a more agricultural area. And so the context of the immediate surroundings of the property are more conducive to this kind of large scale farm operation. And so the actual hog farm here, it's like less disruptive to the overall land use. Also, the property has a lot more non-residential value to it. For example, you have about 6 acres of cleared cropland here that you could lease to a farmer. You also have the balance of the property is about 90 acres of woodlands that has considerable timber value. I mean, the timber here might be worth between $50, $70, and $100,000, just depending on what the timber company is willing to bid for it and how high quality the timber is. So the real question on Barbie Road is not whether it's valuable, it's really what the land is actually worth. Now, to do that, I want to show you this one recent sold comp on Franktown Road that sold nearby at about $400,000. Now, this property is just a little bit smaller, and it actually has similar access, but you have much more open, cleared cropland here on this property. And it's also in a better location, meaning that there's just more commercial residential activity, which means that there's a higher demand for buildable land in this location. Plus, there's no hog farm right next to it, and so it's definitely going to be more valuable. So Barbie Road, though, in comparison, it's going to be due to the wetlands and the access that kind of limits you, plus the hog farm. Even though it's about 97 acres, it's going to punch below its weight in terms of market value relative to its acreage, and it's going to be a little bit closer to some of these 20 to 50 acre sold comps that sold over the past year or so. If I had to guess the market value on Barbie Road, I'd say probably $235,000, give or take. So if you can get this land at about $235,000 or lower, and you're actually in the market for large tract agricultural land in this location that actually has potential for long-term value appreciation, I actually think this property is pretty cool and you should give it a quick look. Now, you're probably wondering though, like, how can you expect to buy a piece of land that's listed over $500,000 at $235,000 $5,000, which is less than half the cost that is being advertised? The answer is it happens all day, every day, round the clock in markets all over the United States. And that's going to be the topic of the next video. So check that video out. It's called How to Buy Land at Half Price. I think you're going to enjoy it.